play it. So Craft 3. Craft 3 is like a super major rewrite of Craft. Kind of inspired by the framework that Craft uses. Yi has come up with a 2.0 a couple of years ago, and it kind of required us to rewrite major portions of the code base. In the process, there was basically no way we figured we could maintain backwards compatibility with plugins, and as long as we were going to break all the plugins, we figured double transgression theory, might as well refactor the entire code base and just make them very drastically different, make things work very drastically different for the better where it made sense. So it's been something we've been working on since the beginning of 2015. So coming up on almost 3 years, 3 years by the time that we launch it. Lots and lots of refactoring, performance improvements, all sorts of things. So let's go, we can go over, this will be probably about 20 minutes or so, just kind of going through some of the cool things that we've added. So first of all, we put a bunch of work into like 3 categories: security, reliability, and performance. This is kind of our like snow leopard release, I guess. Like we're just rewriting everything and making everything better in these 3 ways. We're not so much focusing on end user features for this release. We're setting ourselves up for being able to do tons of cool user development stuff once 3.0 is out, but for the time being, like, we're really trying to scope it at just these 3 things. So as far as that goes, we've given Craft a modern tech stack. When it came out in Craft 1 came out in 2013, and Craft 2 came out just 6 months later or so. And at the time, it was pretty modern, but at this point, PHP's progressed quite a bit. What you can rely on hosting environments actually having installed is quite a bit better than it was as well. So we've taken this as an opportunity to kind of modernize the entire stack of Craft. So first of all, it requires PHP 7. It's built on Yi 2. It's got a job queue, so Craft 1 and 2 have like this like kind of poor man's job thing called tasks, and in Craft 3, for reliability's sake, we've got an actual queue that you can run from a console or a daemon. We've used Guzzle 6, Twig 2, and OpenSSL, which is a major security improvement over whatever Craft 2 uses. Was it Encrypt? There it is. So the end result of a lot of our refactoring work is that load time is much faster. So we have a demo site called Happy Logger, and running Craft 2 on PHP 7 versus Craft 3 on PHP 7, you can see the difference. We were able to take it from 110 to 77 milliseconds for time to first byte. We've also drastically improved general query performance. A big part of the performance improvements came from just queries. So loading 5,000 entries in Craft 2 took 8.7 seconds versus 1.8 in Craft 3. And then thirdly, memory consumption is way down. So typical request that would take 72 megs in Craft 2 now takes 20 megs in Craft 3. I'm sorry, not a typical request. Loading those 5,000 entries takes significantly less memory now. Number 2 is open source. So Craft is like a proprietary CMS, as in we own the code and we license it to be used. However, in Craft 3, we open sourced that proprietary code. So it's all up on GitHub now. You can go to github.com/craftcms/cms and see all of our source code there. You can fork it. You can create issues for it or pull requests, all that kind of stuff. And with it all being out there in the open, we were able to give it composer support. So if you're not familiar with Composer, it's basically like the NPM of PHP. So you can kind of create like a single file that defines all your project dependencies, and then Composer will like recursively install all of those things. And so now Craft is just one more of those dependencies. So if you have some big projects you need to work on, that you know is going to involve more than just Craft or just Craft plugins, or you actually want to load in custom composer libraries and stuff, you can do that now, and it'll all just be managed right alongside Craft and its dependencies, which is kind of cool. You can run this command, composer require custom/CMS, to actually install it into an existing project, and then we also have what's called a composer project, which is basically like a repo that is used as a starting point for building Craft sites. And they have this create project command that basically runs like a git pull of the repo. It doesn't actually get all the git history data, but it'll download the files as they are in the latest release, and then it will run composer install automatically for you. So by the end of this command, you will have like Craft plus like a bunch of other files that aren't part of our source code, but just there to get your website running. You'll notice that when you install it, if you've used Craft 2, the project structure has changed quite a bit. So it used to be that we had like a Craft/app folder that contained the entire application, and that today for Craft 3 would be found in vendor/Craft/CMS, sans any of the other dependencies. The config folder used to be tucked away in the Craft folder. Now it's just direct right at the project root. Same with storage and templates. And then the default Craft project now calls the web root type folder web rather than public, but they both serve the same purpose, which is this is the folder that you would point your web server to in order to serve Craft. One of the advantages of having everything on GitHub and composer support and everything is that you can like live on the bleeding edge. Like we don't need to do a nightly release or anything or dev previews anymore. If you want to just be on the latest commit, regardless of whether we've stamped it as stable, you can tell Composer to use that latest version, and it'll kind of disregard the actual version, like release information and stuff like that. The other thing that's coming in Craft 3 is multi-site. So Craft 2 already has like a pretty full-featured localization support for doing multilingual sites and you know, sites that target sister sites that target different regions, but it's all very location-based. So even if they're both kind of Englishy, like if you had like a U.S. English market and a UK English market, the defining factor of like what a locale is in Craft 2 is always location. And there is a way to kind of hack it so that you can create custom locales that aren't technically location-based. And we've actually had to recommend that route to quite a few people. And so for Craft 3, we just decided like let's just make this. Let's stop assuming that you know the only reason you would need multiple sites under a single Craft install is language or location, and give it like a full-featured multi-site implementation. So with that said, sites are like locales in Craft 2, except first of all, you give them a custom name and a handle. So whereas in Craft 2, the name and handle would just always be the locale ID, and you wouldn't really have a choice there. They have a language, but they're not defined by it. So each site you add is going to get a little language selection, and you can choose what language it is, and you can use that for translating content or for defining like the lang attribute in your HTML. But they're not like that's just an attribute of the site. It's not the reason the site has to exist. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. Multi-sites can share the same language, or multiple sites can share the same language. So if you have two sister sites that both exist and both target the same audience in the same place and speak the same language, that's fine. And then when you're defining your fields in Craft 2, you basically have the choice of whether they are translatable or not translatable, and if they were, then every single locale was going to get its own value for those fields. In Craft 3, you can either have fields that aren't translatable or fields that are translatable on a per site or per language basis, or if you really have some weird requirement, you even have a way to do a custom switch. And basically that just defines like when you save a value for a field in one site, like it tells Craft which other sites you should copy that value over to. If it's not a translatable field, it's going to copy it across all the sites. If it's translatable per language, it's only going to copy it to the other sites that share the same language, etc. So then, once you use multi-site, versus, for example, maybe just building 2 separate craft installs. If it's a multilingual site, or you have 2 sister sites that have the same users, or share some content or whatever, or if you have a microsite that you're building that's kind of just, you know, tangentially related to the parent site, or you want to build a landing page. You know, these are all use cases where multi-site might come in handy for you. It does not make sense if you're dealing with like 2 different organizations entirely, even if there might be some shared content. Like, I think if the users of the system are going to be 100% different, then that's kind of the rule of thumb, like, don't do it. And then also, if there's just no shared content between the 2, even if you have some user accounts that might benefit from being shared across them, you should at least kind of do a quick proof of concept and see if it's actually worth the hassle, because it's not, like, the way that Craft does this multi-site stuff, like, each additional site is going to Craft, like, you basically have a single store of all your content. And the more sites you have within a single Craft install, the more sections you're going to have that are available to everyone that has permissions to see them, and just like the more kind of managey type things that are going to happen in CMS. So if you've got no shared content between different sites, it might be better for the authoring experience to just keep them as separate Craft installs, depending on the use case. As far as internationalization support goes, Craft has always been really good at internationalization features, but in Craft 3, we've made it even better. So first of all, we're using the Intel extension when it's available, which means, you know, basically you're going to have like the latest and greatest data on how times should be formatted and dates should be formatted and all that kind of stuff. And you're kind of in control of what version of that is actually installed. So you can get your server updated faster than Craft gets released if you wanted to. We do supply fallback data for all the locales if you don't want to install that or you can't. And then we've also added support for PostgreSQL in Craft 3, and that gives you emoji support everywhere in the system, which is kind of cool. And then we've also added support for translation categories, which is something Craft 2 didn't have. So in Craft 2, like all the translations that you were storing, not in the content, but like file-based translations, like UI translations, were all managed under a single category, which sometimes led to complications if like Craft was defining a word for its control panel and the site had the same word it was using but had a different meaning behind the word, like news or whatever it was, section maybe. So now everything's categorized and kind of siloed into what they're actually being used for. Assets have gotten better in Craft 3. Mainly, we've added this image editor, which gives you the ability to rotate and crop and flip your photos, but then we've also added this focal point tool, so you can choose where in the image you want to Craft to crop the photo to, if the crop is not exactly the same ratio as the actual image. So you can kind of see an example of like pre-focal point and post-focal point, how it was able to be more smart about where to focus it. We've added this concept called volumes, which replaces what we called asset sources in Craft 2. And main thing there is plugins can supply their own volume type. So if you want to add a Dropbox volume type and start managing files in Dropbox, you can do that. And then you can also store your user photos there, which is something that you couldn't do before. We also have this utility section, which just has lots of different utilities and kind of cleans up different parts of the control panel into this one single spot in the back end. We've also added something called content migrations. So in Craft 2, there was basically there was the main application migration track, and then each plugin had their own migration track for making database changes and stuff. In Craft 3, we've added one third category, which is just for general content, which is anything you want it to be. Basically, it's site-specific migrations rather than plugin or application-specific. So you can go into Terminal, you can create a new migration. Let's say you want to create a field programmatically in a way that like everyone gets the same field. You could do that, and then basically the file is going to show up in this migrations folder, and you would just go in and you would basically fill in this safe up function with whatever specific API, whatever specific code you need. Just working with our various service layer APIs to do that kind of stuff. So this would be the code for creating a new plain text field called address, for example. Content migrations have access to the full set of Craft APIs, so you can do whatever you want in them. 8, templating. We've added a concept called element queries, which replaces element criteria model in Craft 2, which is basically like Craft's concept of like defining the criteria for any entries or assets or whatever it is that you want to fetch, and running that query and then returning the actual resulting elements to you. So element criteria is the new element criteria model. Hey, Chris. Still works the same for the most part. So this is very much, this kind of looks like what it would have looked like in Craft 2. But the difference is that you've got way more power here than there used to be. So like some of the functions kind of do the same thing, but have been renamed. The old ones still work for now, but they're deprecated. So instead of find, you can call all, etc. But then we've added a whole bunch of new things. So you can like override the select statement of the query. You can override the conditions or add new conditions to the query. And this is like, you know, you're talking directly to like ease database agnostic condition defining layer. So you can kind of have full control over what the actual SQL is that gets executed. You can join. You can change the way that the data is returned. So you can choose to have it return as actual arrays rather than the instantiated models. Or you can have the results indexed by some column value. Or you could, you know, do all these kind of like aggregate and, you know, different special functions. So you could get all the results of a single column in the query, or pairs, or, you know, a single value, or just see if something exists or not without, you know, needing to actually grab any data. And then there's aggregate functions like sum and average, min, max. And then finally, you can call these batch functions, which basically, if you have a site with many thousands of entries that you need to pull all into the template at once, but you're worried that that's going to overload the memory or the single query is just going to clog up the database server, you can run the query in batches, and that kind of simplifies the task of doing that. So here's an example of that. You can get, or actually there's a few different examples of some of the templating stuff we've added. So you can get entries indexed by their IDs by adding this index by and then type in the column name that you want to index the query by. You can get just the titles by overriding the select statement and then calling pairs and then have this indexed by the ID. You can get the average value for a custom field by doing this, by like basically, you know, limiting the results to just results where the field age column is not null, and then return the average of that column. And then here's an example of the lazy loading. So you can call this each function instead of all, and basically by default that's going to run it's going to loop through and do new queries every 100 users that are returned. And you don't even have to complicate your template whatsoever beyond typing each instead of all, which is kind of cool. You can also, if you want to just see what the raw SQL is so that you can see what you should be modifying on it, you can call this get raw SQL function and it'll return the actual SQL statement. You know, I didn't put the whole thing there, but you get the idea. We've also added craft.app as a templating variable, and that basically gives you access to the full service layer of Craft. So rather than us like making all these like one-off exceptions for now you can access this thing or that thing, you can just access everything that PHP gets to access within your twig templates. So for example, this would give you the value of like the dev mode config setting through Craft's config service and its general config array off of that. You can also loop through all the sections, which is like not something that we ever, you know, should have created a template-facing tag for, but if you really need it, then you can just do it directly the same way that PHP would through craft.app.sections.getAllSections. We've also added this debug toolbar, which is something that the Yi guys created, which basically at the bottom of every request, you can see kind of some info about how the request went, and then you can drill down and see, you know, all these different interesting things about it. You know, and see what the logs were, what deprecation errors happened, how performance worked, database queries that were executed, any asset bundles, which is the Yi concept, any asset bundles that were served, and then if there were any email messages sent. And finally, configuration. We've made Craft a lot more configurable than it used to be. So you can define environment-specific variables in a .env file now that you would not commit to get, and kind of put all your like environment-specific secret stuff there. And then when you do that, you can, and then if you've used Craft 2 before, you might be familiar with the concept of environment-specific variables. And with the addition of supporting .env, we've just figured there's too many crazy environment things going on. So there's per environment configs, which is a thing where Craft's general.php file and other config files can actually define like multi-dimensional arrays of config settings, where the top level array is the key of different environments that the site might run in. So like .com versus .dev or staging and production, however you want to name those. And so that's what we call environment configs. We've added in Craft 3 php.env environment variables, which is what we just showed you. And then thirdly, this environment variables thing, which basically ends up being a major support nightmare for everyone that starts out using Craft. And with all three of these things, it just got a little too much. So we decided for Craft 3, we're going to drop that. If Trump can screw over the environment, so can we. So site URLs can be defined per environment using the site URL config setting in general.php like this. So this is an example of a multi-environment config where you have the asterisk, which just kind of signifies like this is a multi-environment config, and here's the default values in that top one, and then drill down and specify your specific environment things below there. And this is kind of the recommended way of setting your site URL. We've also added support for this config/volumes.php, where you can override various asset volume config settings, including what type of volume it is and any settings within it. So this was kind of a pretty popular request. So you could have one environment that's running off of a local file system, whereas production might be running off of Amazon S3, that kind of stuff. So now you can do that. And then also we've made it possible to override all plugin settings with config files now. So for example, if you have a plugin that defines a few different settings, you can create a UI-based settings admin for it now, but like you could in Craft 2, but you can also now, for free, all those settings can be overridden by a config file within the config folder named after your plugin's handle. And then we've also, I mentioned earlier that we added Guzzle 6, and the cool thing about Guzzle 6 is that it complies with the PSR7 spec for creating HTTP requests. And so if you ever run Craft in an environment like an intranet where it's pretty blocked and needs to go through a proxy or something to get requests out, now you can create this config/guzzle.php file, and that's going to give you a place to define all of your Guzzle configuration stuff in a central place. And everywhere within Craft that is creating HTTP requests, it's going to, including libraries that where Craft isn't even making the request directly, like Amazon S3 and stuff like that, it can feed in a Craft supplied Guzzle instance now to those things. And because Guzzle implements PSR7, they will take it and they will use all the same settings everywhere. So it's kind of complicated, but solves some pretty annoying situations where Craft is using intranets. So here's an example of that. And then also, finally, we've given Craft the ability to, you now can override Craft's actual application configuration from config/app.php. So two examples of that. If you wanted to override the mailer component and, for example, maybe on different environments you want to use different mailers, you could do that now from app.php. And then secondly, you could supply define a custom cache component. Like if you wanted to use a cache driver that Craft doesn't ship with, for example, Redis, then that's fine. You just compose and install Redis, and then go into app.php and type this code to tell Craft to use your component instead of the one that Craft comes with. And that's that. So just to recap, what's coming in Craft 3, we've got big focus on security, reliability, and performance. We've got a composer, multi-site, internationalization is significantly improved, assets have gotten volumes, and the image editor. We have the utility section, we have content migrations, templating has gotten a lot of kind of power user improvements. We added the bug toolbar, and then finally lots of configuration improvements. And that's pretty much it. That's Craft 3. It's been a really long project. It's getting closer and closer to done every day, and we're really excited to get it out. So it's in beta right now. You can get it from craftstudents.com/3, numero 3. All right.
Can you talk a little bit about and dive a little bit more into like the transition from where Craft is now into the open source world? Like how's that going to work?
So
because somebody forked it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like weird things with putting proprietary software up on GitHub in a public repo.
Yeah.
So and we don't have we don't know exactly how it's going to go, but we've been running the beta like this since late January, and so far the transition's been really smooth. It was kind of crazy because when we first launched it, there was like a massive flood of activity on it. We were like the top PHP project for a couple days, just as people were checking it out and stuff. But I think, we're gonna, before we go stable, we're gonna need to get, I think they call it the contributor agreement or something like that in place, where basically just a GitHub integration that ensures that anyone that's submitting pull requests has accepted the terms that we put, that basically says you acknowledge that any code you contribute here is owned by Pixel and Tonic, which is the parent company, and not you. So it's not open source in that, it's not like free open source in that regard. And it's like kind of awkward because it's proprietary and commercial, we weren't really sure, is there going to be a knee-jerk reaction to this? Like, people are going to not like the idea of contributing to code that they don't even get to own and they still have to pay for to use. But the reason we figured it would probably work out is because we were already getting a lot of, not actual pull requests, but the same, things that would have been easier as pull requests. People would write in and say hey, I'm running into this issue, and if you go to line 504 and on this file and replace this line with this line, get this prose of how to go about creating the change. And so all of that has shifted into actual pull requests now, which is a lot smoother for everyone. So, and then as far as issues go, we've always had a lot of feedback that the community gives us, and GitHub Issues is way better at that than user voice or anything else we've used in the past. So overall, it's been really smooth so far. We'll see what happens when it goes stable, but our expectation is it'll continue to be smooth sailing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about Craft CMS. And I browsed through your website. The interface is very clean. I was wondering if you could give us a quick tour of Craft and what is different from the Drupal team.
So I am not the one to tell you how it differs from Drupal, because I've never used Drupal.
Really?
I've also never used WordPress.
I've never used Drupal.
Oh, I've never used WordPress either. So I'm
no overhead.
You should show that image handling. I think that's the most impressive between Craft and Drupal.
The image handling?
Yeah.
For Craft 3 or just the Craft 2 images?
Even the Craft 2,
okay. I can't show you Craft 3 right now because it's in a very non-working state on my computer because I'm halfway done with a big commit. But so this is the demo site that we have. You can go to demo.craftcms.com and use hosted version of this, or you could go to GitHub. We have a link on that site. You can go to GitHub and you can download it yourself and install this locally. But this is kind of a fake agency site that we built a couple of years ago. And the point of it was to kind of demonstrate some of the different types of content that Craft can handle and stuff like that. So we've got a homepage, we've got an About Us page with different type of content from the homepage ad. Services, there's 6 services, each one is in a specific order, and you can drive down and see more info about those services. We've got like a portfolio section called Our Work, and if you go into any of these, you can see within like a case study, might also work. Down at the bottom, you'll find that each of these portfolio entries actually has the services that it was related to that were involved in this particular work project. And then finally, you have news, and news is kind of a combination of actual news entries and then just links to other things. So if we go to the next page, like that would be an example of like, it's just an outbound link rather than an actual article, versus an actual article would be this one. So yeah, you can see in the back end, the key to understanding Craft is Craft, and I think that it shares some commonality with Drupal here. Craft does not care about the front end so much. It's really focused on managing the content and letting you work out how the front end works. So you'll find like it's not super structured like some page-based CMSs are, where it doesn't actually understand what your front-end information architecture is or anything like that. Like if you have things laid out in a certain way on the website, that's great. That's more of a templating problem as far as Craft's concerned, though. And the templates can figure out like how things are laid out and where they're pulling content from and all that kind of stuff. And I think like the reason that was a good idea in hindsight is because content is becoming more adaptive and it's going different places. And so if down the road you wanted a mobile app, or down the road you have like, some completely different context for the same content, you can do that in a way that's not awkward because you don't have to like reproduce the exact same hierarchy everywhere you go. If you have a reason to have a mobile app that just pulls content from like what was a single section on your website, because you have this mobile app super optimized for that one thing, you can do that, and it's, Craft is fine with that. So basically what you can see here, we've got like all the different sections we saw on the front end. They're not in any specific order. We've kind of tweaked them a little bit. Craft lets you like, modify what the little headings are in the sidebar and what the order of the sections are and that kind of stuff. But it's all just a flat list, like here's all your content as far as Craft is concerned. And so if we go into like one of these news entries, hanging out play, you can see like there's a lot of various custom fields here that were all very specifically defined for the content that was needed. Slide preview button, and you can actually see them side by side with the real content. So there's this featured image here, and we could just swap that out. The bike, and then just shows up there. Very, very upscaled image, so that was a bad choice, but saw you guys like bikes. And this thing down here, this article body field, this is called a matrix. So this is kind of an interesting field where you can have like multiple different sub fields, and we call them blocks. So the field actually manages what we call blocks, which are basically groups of fields that you want. So there's like this text block, which has the main text area and chooses the position. There's a gallery block, a heading block. You can kind of see if you go to the bottom, like all the different options here. So if we want to add a whole new section, click this. If we want to add a pull quote, click that. And the specific fields that show up in here and the specific types of blocks that were available, like were all custom defined for this field. So like if we go into settings, fields, all the fields are defined centrally here. Here's this article body. And you can see, you know, all these different block types were just defined right here, and each one has their own like subfields here with their own settings. And then the actual content, the actual fields that show up when you're editing an entry are all defined by the entry types within the sections. So here's all the sections I've defined, and we can go into any one of these. We'll go into news. The news has two different entry types, the article and the link. I'll open up in different tabs. So the article is like the main article. And you can see it's got like these different set fields that we needed in there, versus link was just for creating outbound links. So we only needed just the short description, a featured image, and then the URL that it should point to. And then basically for each one of these entry types, you can just choose which fields you want or which ones you don't need. Is there any specific part of the control panel you wanted to see?
So like when.
Oh, image editing.
Yeah, the image and managing the image.
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts to it. There's this assets tab where you can see all the different asset sources or rename to volumes in Craft 3. And these can have subfolders and stuff like that. And this is kind of where the images actually live. And you can upload things here if you want. You can, you know, view them. You can edit their custom fields. Like images can have custom fields too, just like entries and everything else in Craft. Edit their file name, or replace it. But then the main place where you're interacting with images is going to be through assets fields, which is just a relational field. So if I go into one of these things, this has this featured image assets field that I created. And so it's just a custom field, and you tell it it's of type assets, and then you choose which asset sources it should pull images from. And then you click that, and you can just kind of relate whatever ones you want. You can also, oops, that's definitely not. You can also take images from your computer and just drop them in there, and then it'll upload to the right spot, just like that. And then double click on images if you want, and you can edit their custom fields from here and their file names and all that kind of stuff too.
Isn't there a crop or some sort of, what was it?
Like transforms, image transforms.
For the image.
So there's, we have built the concept of image transforms, which can be defined either in the control panel from assets, image transforms, or you can define them directly in the templates. But basically they are just settings where you can choose, like, you know, how big the image should be, what quality the image should be, and what format it should be. You can actually do format conversions if you want. If you want to force everything to be PNG, you could do that. And those all happen at like kind of the template side of things. So the image you upload is the source image, and that never changes. But then in the templates, you can grab them with a specific transform applied to them, whether it was defined here in the control panel or whether it was defined by your template itself. Your template can just like define, like, give me the image, but make it 100 by 100 or whatever. And then Craft will auto generate the transform based on all those properties, and then give you a URL that's to that transformed image. And then in Craft 3, we'll see. Maybe I can do this now. We'll see. There's like a 90% chance we're going to get some error, and it's just not going to work right now. In Craft 3, we've added this image editor, where in addition to transforms, you have this new edit image button, and that opens the image editor. And then from here, you can like if you uploaded something and you just know there's parts of the image you're never going to need, you can discard them here.
Like create a new one then, or does it like?
It gives you the option, so you can either replace the asset or you can save it as a new asset. And sorry, the buttons are kind of covered by this toolbar thing. But yeah, and then you can also set like the focal point, so click the little focal point thing, and you can choose where that should be. And then there's all the cool rotation stuff.
There's something about choosing a focal point of your transform too?
What was that?
There's something about choosing a focal point of a dynamic transform as well?
So basically when focal points get applied, they get applied when the transform is cropping the image. So if you have an image and let's say the image is 4:6 and you want a square crop of it for your website, like the focal point is going to inform Craft on where it should be focusing the crop. So if you had, like in this case, if I have this focal point all the way down at the bottom, then rather than the crop happening directly in the middle of the image, where it would do if there was no focal point, it'll anchor it to the bottom of the image because it's going to do its best to keep that focal point in the center.
Yeah, but that works on dynamic transform as well?
Yeah, anytime it's transforming where there's a crop and the crop is needing to choose parts of the image to discard, it's gonna anchor it on that focal point. Yeah. And we've also got another branch where we're adding filters and all that kind of stuff, but that's not going to be ready for the 3.0 release. Yeah, lots of cool stuff in the image editor. So then, yeah, and then all this work, I'm not going to want to override the existing image, so I'll just save as new asset. Click that button, and then now it's back here somewhere. I don't remember what the name of that image was. Oh, I guess it's this one, Austin Cities. So, yeah, that's the image editing in Craft.
Inside Craft, is there an analogy to views in Drupal? Meaning taking fields from various content types and knitting them together into different types of views based upon a set of parameters?
Query with the UI.
Yeah, basically like a MySQL query generator for for the fields. This views allows us to take fields from any content type and knit them together into specific different content types. Into different content views, I should say. It's not really a content type, it's a view.
Interesting.
That's one of the big powers of Drupal.
Yeah.
And so that, makes it so that you can begin to have content relations that are extremely powerful and knitting together content in ways that the original content is not, but the design and the content layout using that tool allows you to create that. But specifically, I guess they use it for sort of simple stuff like creating a list out of 5 content types. You know what I mean? So give me the list of the title of all these 5 content types that were created in the last 3 days.
You could definitely do that with element queries on the template side.
Okay.
There's nothing in the UI that would feel to do that sort of thing. Yeah.
Another thing that we do a lot is related content. And it's not just things that are tagged to things terms, people will be this specific blog post is related to these blog posts and all that stuff.
So the relationships it has, I don't know how it compares to Drupal, but so for example, in this work section, each of our work entries in the site has a services performed section or field down at the bottom, where you can kind of choose which of the service entries should be related to this one. So if I click add an entry here, this is basically the services section, and I can choose to add more of those and change the order. And you can also create new services entries directly from here. So.
Is that an analogy to tags?
Editing
references.
And inline editing.
There are tags as a separate concept. This is if you needed to relate full-blown entries.
Right.
I don't know if I have. I can show you really quick. We can create a tags field and just kind of show you how that works. So first, I would need to create a tag group. Oh, I already have one. Look at that. Maybe I do have tags somewhere.
You got it. Tags are great.
Are they?
Standard pair, man.
Are they?
I think tags is one of your built-in fields when you
first
install Craft.
There it is, pizza. Okay, so we have tags here. So tags are the way to do a full taxonomy in Craft, where you're not going to be super OCD about what they're named or all that kind of stuff, and it's more you just want to.
Freeform.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Can you make a structured taxonomy system?
You can. So that would be categories.
Oh, okay. That's called categories. Got it.
Yeah. So we have tags, which are full taxonomy, and categories is more of a strict taxonomy. And categories can be hierarchical and all that kind of stuff.
Taxonomy?
Taxonomy is that's the word. It's a play on taxonomy. It's for
It's unorganized.
Unorganized taxonomy.
Free tagging.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe. Yeah.
You can create a huge mess essentially.
Exactly.
very, very quickly.
And like, we've intentionally not given Craft any sort of tag management UI because that would defeat the purpose. There is a plugin that adds it if you really want it, but yeah, the idea there with tags is like you don't care. You can, once you've created a tag, if you relate it, you can double click and you can rename it.
And will it go find all the content that's been tagged with that tag and create a list on it?
You could do that, yeah. I mean, that would be, yeah, you just, like when I save this, then basically a relationship will exist between this entry and these two tags. And tag, like, so one thing about Craft, like there's at the core, there's this concept called element types. Everything that like is managed in Craft is a type of element. So there's categories, tags, entries, users, assets, matrix blocks are one of them. I'm probably missing something. And then globals. If you have any global content you need to store that's not specific to any entry or anything like that. All of those are element types. And element types, there's a lot of shared attributes, like they have custom fields, and they're relatable. They're all relatable in the same way. So when you relate an asset to an entry, it's the exact same as how a tag gets related to an entry. And so basically within a template, if you have an entry, you can list all its tags in the same way that if you had a tag, you could list all the entries related to it. It's all kind of going through that same central relationship system.
Can users have fields?
Yeah.
And can they have public profiles?
Yeah, so basically you would just create, a bio field and all that kind of stuff that you would need, and then just add it to your users. So if you go to settings, users, there's this fields tab here where you can find your, so if you want to give users an address field, do that, save it. If I go to my user account now, within my profile tab, here's my address field now. So in the same way that entries work and all the other stuff, it all gets stored in the same way.
Is there any way to migrate that sort of configuration, that manual configuration between like dev stage and prod environment?
So not currently. The way that it will happen is through the content migrations that are coming in Craft 3. But right now it's complicated because it requires a familiarity with Craft's PHP API, like all the service layer APIs and stuff. So the long-term goal is that, you'd be able to create things in the UI if you want, but then like export that configuration out and define it as a content migration, send it to all the other Craft installs and, have it keep them up to date as well. But we're just not there yet. We had no intention on doing anything content migration related in Craft 3, but it just turned out we were refactoring how migrations are managed in the first place, and in the process it was really easy to add this really simple, I guess the least we could do was add what we did for Craft 3. And it's just kind of one step in a on a path toward this full-blown content migration, content syncing, multi-environment support. Yeah.
So I have a question for you. So I'm new to Craft. I've done a lot of work with E2 and also some with Drupal.
Oh, cool.
So I actually came to this because I have a pretty large existing E2 project, and they're looking to add a CMS layer on top. So rather than build one from scratch, I was interested in possibly integrating with Craft. My question to you is, well, a couple things. First, is there an easy way to pull in existing like E2 module code into Craft?
Yeah, there is. Especially in Craft 3.
Yeah,
in Craft 2, no. The answer is just no. In Craft 3, yeah, like people are, doing Craft 3 builds with like the Redis extension or with the, I forget what the other one is.
Yeah, it looks like the standard E2 thing.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. I mean, so at this point, yeah, it's a lot easier to like build your own modules and all that kind of stuff. Like that's something I didn't touch on too much in this one because it's more dev facing, but one of the big focuses with Craft 3 is making it so that it can behave more like an actual application platform. So like, for example, we're working on a bunch of new web service stuff for Craft 3 for the plugin store that we're working on. So there's going to be like an API.craftcms.com and an ID.craftcms.com and different things. And we want to do that without writing any plugins. Like we want to just kind of build out this web application for all this, for user management and all this kind of stuff. And we're doing that with by writing actual E modules that are just loaded with Composer directly along with Craft and all that kind of stuff. So.
And is there, because I was just playing around with it, and this might, I didn't realize this wasn't a dev focus talk.
Well, I mean, I should say dev focused in targeted at plugin developers, like existing Craft plugin developers that really understand how the current plugin stuff works.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Because it looked like I could either try and pull Craft in via Composer into the existing project, or kind of rejigger the existing project to all live in a model that could pull it to Craft. I was curious if you had any insight into which might be the way to go.
Two things. First, don't write your own CMS. It's a lifelong horrible decision.
Coming from Brandon, who
has
written his own CMS.
You can't, don't do it. And then the only thing is I would be a little wary of putting too much of a custom application and trying to saddle that with Craft, only because if you've got this application that you're going to be developing long term, you probably don't want to force yourself to be limited to Craft. For example, when E2.1 comes out, we're not going to be able to immediately jump on that because it's, it requires PHP 7.1. It's got all these breaking changes that are going to require us to go back and spend another year refactoring stuff. And you don't want to have your application be waiting around for that if you really need something coming in E2.1. So something to consider. I mean, I guess at that point you could always just split them apart again. But yeah, just the only thing to be aware of. Craft, I would say Craft or any off-the-shelf CMS is going to be best suited for projects where that CMS is going to be the major part of the project. And if it's not, then it's probably in the long run better to just have the CMS as its own thing and have the application as its own other thing, and let them talk to each other in various ways, but don't try and saddle them together. Yeah.
What's the way, sorry, I'm so sorry. Just rounding letters. So the big thing is what's happening right now is we're basically going from downloaded packages to a Composer workflow. And so I'm wondering for you, for Craft 3, is that a concern at all, or is your user base already used to being PHP developers and in the Composer workflow and everything?
I would say the majority are not. It's going to be a pain in the butt for a lot of them. And so to try and soften the blow, we've actually, so in Craft 2, it was auto-updatable, or self-updatable. So you could, we had this whole web service that would tell it about updates, and we had, Delta updates that it would send and all that kind of stuff, or patch updates or whatever. And we threw all that code out, but we did replace it with a new self-updater UI that just behind the scenes uses Composer. So basically, Composer is a dependency of Craft in a weird way. When you install Craft, one of the dependencies you're going to get is the entire Composer source code. And so Craft is able to then bootstrap that up behind the scenes and use that to self-update itself, in a much cleaner way. So it takes longer than it did in Craft 2, but the site downtime is much shorter than it used to be, which is good. So even though it takes longer for you, it's not much of a pain in the butt for your customers. And it's probably, in the long run, it's going to be more stable because it's Composer and not our own crappy code. So, not that our code. Just don't run any big sites off Craft.
What about a caching layer? Is there a caching layer built into Craft?
There's a couple things. There's some data caching stuff. So Yi has its own cache service that can store data, key value stuff, and you can there's a Redis driver for that, and database and file base, and however you want to have that actually stored. And then there's also, we call it template caching, partial template caching, where you could basically wrap parts of your template code up in these cache tags, and then Craft will cache the output of it and serve the output rather than reparsing the template code every time. Maybe you can set different parameters for how that should get busted, or or when it should expire and all that kind of stuff. But it's pretty simple, and it's not the best. Like it tries a little too hard in one way, and so we're gonna probably revisit it at some point. Yeah.
How stable is Craft currently? Would you recommend not using it for any kind of production use, or?
Yeah, we wouldn't recommend using it for client use at this point. There's plenty of people that are, and there's a lot of people that are using it for like their own personal stuff.
Yeah.
But it's still we're still developing it. So, and as we do, there's things that we have had to break. Like for example, like just in the last week, we replaced the background task stuff that we had written for Craft 2 with like an actual queue extension. We're using a E2 queue extension now. And any plugins that were out there that provided their own task types broke in that process because they have to be rewritten as actual jobs now.
What is the kind of timeline to towards very rough?
Timeline, we're hoping to get it out in the next half a year, sometime early next year probably. And we might, Craft itself is really close. The biggest holdup is all the other stuff. Like it's a huge breaking change for plugins, and we don't want to go through this multi-year process of waiting for every plugin developer to finally update their shit. So we want to time the release of it with a plugin store and use that as a carrot to convince plugin developers to get ready on day one. So we're having a Craft conference in October. A big component of that is going to be a plugin lab, development lab, where we're trying to get all the plugin developers there to kind of help them, with anything that's, stopping them, all that kind of stuff.
But if you're not using very many plugins, you say closer to.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, we don't want to say it's stable and call it a release, general availability release until the plugin store is ready. The other thing is that we've got this major commerce plugin that's, as far as scope goes, just as big, if not bigger than Craft itself. Yeah. It's a massive beast, and that's got to be working too. We can't release Craft 3 GA until that's ready to go. Partly because the plugin store is going to rely on it. We can't do plugin store until it's done. And that's ported, but there's a few different features we need to add before we're at that point. So there's just a lot of moving parts between the plugin store and the Commerce 2 and all this online services stuff that needs to have, user accounts and API and stuff that needs to happen. And all of those need to kind of be done before we're ready. So given that, we might get to a point where we decide, Craft itself is stable. It might not be ready just because we don't want to call it ready because Commerce and plugin store aren't ready, but it is. So at that point, if that point comes, then we'll probably call it a release candidate and just have a multi-month release candidate stage. And that will be our signal that this is good to go. You can go ahead and start using it on client work, even though it's not stable yet. Yeah.
How many people are behind the Craft development and the Craft vision as a project?
How many people behind it?
Yeah, there's you and how many other people are writing this thing?
Okay. So yeah, there's the development team. I think there's 5 of us.
5
that are
developers.
Yeah, 5 of us that are working. The company itself is 7 people, and all but 2 of us are developing full time, and then the other guys are sales and marketing. So yeah.
Do you guys have any publication sites posted through, or that use Craft as their base? Where they
publication sites journals and stuff like that? Yeah. You heard of the Associated Press? They've got a couple sites. Actually, it's kind of funny. We've got there's Craft projects happening at Associated Press, New York Times, Guardian, ProPublica, all these different things, but a lot of it's internal stuff. As far as external stuff goes, ProPublica and Associated Press are the 2 big ones. And then there's a lot of smaller smaller stuff. But,
Why do you think those guys chose Craft CMS? You know, I mean, they got a landscape of CMSs to choose from.
yeah.
Why this one?
Just for Associated Press, it was a recommendation by the guy that, by the agency that they tend to work with. Their agency did a bunch of research and came back with it as a recommendation, and they went with it. It's not AP. Like their official site is not running it. They have some crazy thing, but they have a couple different blogs that they run with it. And then ProPublica, ProPublica has like their own little internal web team, and they did a lot of research and came up with trying to figure out what the best CMS for themselves to use would be. And then also it was a recommendation by one of the agencies that they use for a little bit of external dev help. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm interested because like there are things that we wouldn't recommend people for, and I also want to know and publications aren't one of them, but like that's one of the bigger things that I've been working on myself lately, and I'm trying to understand because like everything has its limits, and you can try to jam everything and what it's not supposed to do, but for me as somebody who's like trying to help mitigate risks,
it's like, I mean, I'm not, and I don't want to say that Craft is the perfect solution for everything. Like these are all, relative, like they're big names with simple sites. Like Craft does not have any built-in user approval processes or anything like that. Like it has a permission system and it has drafts and concepts like that, but it doesn't have like the actual workflow built in where you can, Joe signs off and gets approved by Sarah, who, whatever, all that kind of stuff. There's a plugin that adds that sort of thing, but it's not a core feature. And then just in general, like, it's not built for a very large editorial team to be managing content simultaneously. There's, it's on our list, but there's no way to find out if someone else is editing the entry at the same time, or drafts aren't storing like just the deltas of what changed. So if you publish a draft, you're also overwriting changes that happened on the website in the interim. And, so there's like definitely room to improve, and it's not there yet, but yeah.
What about performance-wise? Is it performance?
It can be. It can be.
The E thing tells you.
The what?
The E toolbar will tell you how to use it.
Yeah, I mean, the E toolbar helps for like diagnosing performance bottlenecks. If you turn out you're running the same query 100 times, it gives you an idea of what's slowing things down. Like, it's hard to compare apples to apples on this because, like, compared to WordPress, it's a hell of a lot slower than a default WordPress install. It's a hell of a lot faster than the average WordPress install when you add all the plugins in and all that kind of, like, there's not really possible to do a site on the same caliber without advanced custom fields and other things like that. I haven't done, so the last I can remember is we had a guy who did a bunch of CMS comparison stuff, and I think Craft 2 came out about on par with Drupal on like default configuration, default, like nothing going on the page or anything like that. And that was before all the Craft 3 performance improvements happened. So Craft 3 is like twice as fast as Craft 2 was. I don't know, this was also Drupal 7. I don't know about Drupal 8. So, yeah. And then again, like so much of the performance though is just what are you doing on it? Any CMS can serve a blank page pretty easily. Like the question is like, how fast is it going to be when you load the different types of content you're trying to get in there? Craft does have a lot of ways to improve performance. We mentioned caching, but then there's also eager loading support, so you can tell the element queries ahead of time, like what sorts of things need to be eager loaded down the road. So if you're loading 100 entries, and each of those entries are going to have a featured image you want to load, rather than having that be 101 queries, you could have it be 3 queries kind of thing. And then there's various caching improvements or Redis-based caching improvements and plenty of server optimizations you can do. So it's I would say it's like on par probably with Drupal, maybe a little bit faster, maybe a little slower depending on what you're doing. And if you're having major issues, there's always Cloudflare and all sorts of things like that.
I think you guys do testing, right, too?
No, we don't. So Craft is like self-hosted, so you would pick your own host, and we have 2 hosting partners talking to others as well. Yeah, so we, highly recommend you go with one of those if you want, if you want a host that really understands how Craft works. There are others that are, figuring it out too, and we're adding new partners as time goes on, but we just launched the concept of hosting partners like a month ago with these 2. So, what's that?
Who are your partners?
There's a company, it's UK-based, called Fort Rabbit, but they're basically like, they simplify getting your site on AWS. So it's kind of like Craft optimized AWS-based hosting. And you can pick your region and stuff, so even though they're UK-based, you can pick the West Coast region if you want, or whatever. And then the other one's Architect, and they're just kind of a traditional host, but they're totally, like, it's VPS hosting, but you kind of don't have any control over anything. Everything goes through their support. So they're kind of a host plus IT department for you. So depending on what you need, like, those are kind of the 2 ends of the spectrum. If you just want a host you want to work and you don't want to deal with any of the configuration type stuff, you go with Architect. And if you want more control, but you don't want to deal with all the config settings behind AWS, you go with Fort Rabbit.
And how does the licensing work? To use a commercial product?
Yeah, so it's basically there's 3 editions of Craft. It's all the same code, but there's a bit that gets changed and changes which features you get. The first one is free, and that's kind of built for sites buying for a developer. So if you're just checking it out for yourself, building your own portfolio site, whatever it is, you can use Personal, and you get basically everything you're ever going to need for you. And then if you're building sites, we got a lot of feedback. People were building sites where they only needed 1 user account, but it wasn't for themselves, it was for a client. So for that, we added a client edition, which costs $200 and gives you 2 user accounts, yours, the admin, and then the client account, which is stuck behind the permission system, can't do everything, but it can do all the content administration stuff. And then thirdly, there's Pro, which gives you like a full-blown user management feature. So you can have user groups and user permissions on those groups, and
Those are one-time fees?
Yeah, so that's kind of changing with Craft 3. Right now, these are one-time fees. It's either $0, $199, or $299.
Yeah.
In Craft 3, once that launches, we're probably going to move to a model where it's a one-time fee to get the license, and it's yours to keep forever. But we will start putting a halt on like upgrades and support after 1 year, and expect you to pay like a 20% of the license fee to keep that going. So after a year, it would be like a, if you're using Craft Pro at $299, then after a year, it'd be like a $60 or $59 renewal fee to get more updates and support.
And do you have any plans, or do you have now, or either any plans later to offer kind of a larger kind of potential site license? The reason I ask is, not for the project I was going for, my other one, I have kind of a SaaS startup. We have this club management platform. We always get requests from people like, hey, can you do our website? And the answer has always been no, I don't want to deal with it. And I don't, because we tried experimenting using Drupal, which I'm fairly familiar with, and it was just too much effort to deal with the hosting and the updates and remote site. So I'm curious to hear if there's such an option is basically, we're going to run it on whatever domain sign up with us, and you're going to per seat total or a per seat kind of thing.
There's been a few cases like that where the built-in licensing plans didn't really make sense. So I would say just reach out to us. Like, you can contact hello@craftcms.com, and that will get you into Leslie, who's our that guy. And he can kind of work with you on coming up with like a custom licensing arrangement that makes sense for that. So there's been maybe 10 of these sorts of cases in the past. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Good, yeah.
Cool, Brandon,
All right.
thank you so much for coming down
Yeah.
and dropping by and giving us this great presentation on Craft. It's certainly interesting. Open up the eyes of the Drupal development shop that we're in right here, so.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Thanks a lot for hosting.
Yeah, I'm just gonna turn this recording
I
off.
can do that, I got it.
Is that like $7 an hour?
I don't know, go ahead, we got other